Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things, although a nice quick one, because what I've got here is something that I have done a few times on the channel at Imperial Guardsmen, but what I want to show you today is how to paint these camo cloaks. Now this is actually very similar to how the Warhammer TV crew have done theirs, so if you want to see somebody with a nicer camera do it, then you can follow up with that afterwards. As well, the skin and the black uniform is something I have covered in other videos, and I'll link to the Commissar video in particular for that because that's going to have the best tips. But as far as painting the camo cloak, I've got a slightly different way of going about things, which I find a little simpler. So all of the paints will be listed in the description below. Let's get started. Now ordinarily you're not likely to have finished all of the other details before painting the cape. You would probably just do base coats for skin and uniform and what have you, and that way you can be a little bit messier than I'm going to be while applying this cape. Luckily it is one of the last colours you're going to apply anyway, even when you're doing your base coats, because it's a top layer. So we're going to start off first of all. I have here Death World Forest, and I love this green. It's got a little bit of a touch of yellow to it, which is really pleasant. Now, what's important here, take your time when you come near areas that you have already painted, and you'll find it covers pretty well. I've used a light grey primer here, but it will cover pretty well over almost anything. What's important is that you do come back and give it a second coat if you need to. This is one of those colours where you really need this base coat solid. Alright, so we've got a nice solid colour, and that's already looking leagues better than just grey. What I'm going to do now, we're actually going to dry brush the cape itself. I recommend grab yourself a little makeup brush. I've got here, this is a spot liner, but anything small and pretty soft if you can get your hands on it. A CITADEL small dry brush will work here as well. Now, ironically, here, it's actually difficult to put too much on because we do want, first of all, to dry brush following the folds of the cape, but as we build up the colour, don't worry if it seems like you're overpowering the green. Now, we do want to get a little bit of variation in colour here. Now, some parts, you're going to come very close to areas that you have already painted. Easy as, just start close to them and brush away. Now, in some areas, like up around his face, I really don't want to have to repaint any of that. So I've got Nurgling Green, the layer version, and I'm going to just finish off laying in some of that colour. These highlights don't need to be particularly precise, you're just looking to get a little bit of volume here. And same to anywhere else on the cloak. What you can do is water down that Nurgling Green a little more than you normally would, because you still want some of the translucency to try and mimic that dry brush effect. You'll find, even if you're not getting it in exactly the same place, the dry brush is going to act as quite a handy guide for where you want some of these creases and folds. So once that's dried and had time to settle, you've got an opportunity there, like I said, to add a fair bit of depth. What we'll do now is apply a layer of Plaguebearer flesh, and admittedly from this point on, this is going to be very similar to how the Warhammer TV crew have done theirs already. I am using Plaguebearer flesh as well because it's got this nice yellowy tint to it, which you can just put straight over the top of the Nurgling Green, and it brings this all together really nicely. So, over all of the green, let's go. Now, even though Nurgling Green is quite a muted green, we've got lovely rich, I love what Plaguebearer flesh does there. For our camo pattern, we're going to start by applying Militarum Green, and I've got a medium layer brush here. The important thing to remember is wherever you lift your brush away is where you're going to get a blob of paint underneath, alright? So if I draw, let's just squiggle on, I need a little more on my brush, squiggle on a rough shape. When I head back to the center, when I lift my brush away, that's where the paint is going to pull. Alright, so you can use that. Physics is on your side here. Just little splotchy squiggles, then head back to the center to darken them down a bit. You can do this straight over the creases and folds because the contrast is going to quite naturally take advantage of that. Try not to overthink it. So keep putting it out to arm's length to get an idea of what you're actually putting on, because it's quite difficult when you're stuck up close But yeah, let's apply Militarum Green as our first camo patches. It's important to remember to occasionally go to the edge of the cloth. If you keep everything all very orderly, it's not going to look as natural. Instead, go to the edge occasionally so it looks like one big sheet of cloth that's had this pattern applied and then cut into shapes. We'll do the same thing again now with Cygor brown, although you could use here Garagak Sewer instead. Now, let's just carry on the pattern. You might notice that instead of the splotch shapes that I was doing with the Militarum Green, instead I've done little patches of dots, which I thought worked better for sort of an undergrowth look with this. Now we'll apply a few little dots of Ogryn Camo to finish off the look. Now I'm using this because once we've applied that Plaguebearer flesh over our green from earlier, it's going to have a yellower tint to it than it would if we were to go back to Nurgling Green here. So there's nothing saying you couldn't use Nurgling Green, but I think in order to color match a little more effectively, Ogryn Camo is not a bad choice here. So little dots, little patches, and let's come back in a couple of seconds here. Now, as well as getting some camo pattern on there, you can use that in rough little patches on the creases to get a highlight as well. It's going to tie in quite nicely with the rest of the camo pattern and it will look oddly natural. So what I'm going to do now is just a couple of extra details, just to finish him off and get him ready. I'll then apply a base and matte varnish him so he's not quite so shiny. Let's get a look at what he looks like when he's all finished. And with those last couple of details applied and his base finished off, our miniature is complete. And the eye-catching part is definitely going to be that cloak, which is ironically the easiest part of that miniature. So it doesn't matter whether you've got very simply painted guardsmen with an extremely nicely painted cloak on top, pick the part of the miniature that's going to draw the eye and spend a little bit of time on it. So in this case, very definitely the cloak. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons for keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Rod, and Jimmy. Your support means the world, folks. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.